All right, thank you, everybody. I guess the next panel has the difficult task to follow after this panel that we talked about, John, and the Joint Center. The title of this panel was "Does South Florida Need a Regional Vision and Strategy? Reactions from the Public and Private Sector." And it really came forth out of this lecture series where we're trying to rethink planning. And as Charlie said, the thing that really came out of this, we need a more regional approach. So we tried to put a panel together where we really want to ask people, does this actually make sense to have a regional approach? Of course, we have a regional planning council. We have 2 regional planning councils. But what form would that take? Does it make sense? Is that what we really need? Now, I was here in '95, and John was still running the Joint Center at that time. And I was thinking myself, when I was hearing the panelists, I was thinking about, how did that center work? And I think Carla Coleman said to me something really interesting. He says it was a trusted place. And to me, that was really the most interesting thing. The reason it was successful was because of John's leadership, but also because it was a trusted place. And I think it reinforces the things that Charlie and I have been talking about this. Is there a trusted place? Is there a trusted place where we can go to get information about this region, about what's happening with our future? And I think Charlie and I would probably agree that the answer right now is no. So with that, I want to ask, and Mike is looking at me like, I don't agree with that. So what we have here is we have a panel representing both the public and the private sector. And I sent them an email. Not everybody received it. And I know some of you actually did receive it finally this morning. But I asked a couple of questions, and I'm going to read the questions for you in case you didn't get them, and then I'll go over the panel, and if everybody can just introduce themselves, that would probably be better than that I try to tell everybody who you are. So the question was, does South Florida need a regional vision and strategy? And if your answer is yes, how do you think that should become, how do you think that can be accomplished? And if your answer is no, why not? Right, so let's start with that. Then I have a couple of other questions which we can take on later. And I think, if you were here for the earlier session where we really talked about an entity that was like that, feel free to interject that in there. So, Mike, if you can introduce yourself and start with you. And
do you want me just to introduce, or do you want us all to introduce?
Let's quickly introduce everybody, and then we'll go back.
Michael Bush, Executive Director with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. That would be Martin, St. Lucie, Indian River, and Palm Beach counties, and everything in between that.
I'm Joe Giletti. I'm the Executive Director for the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority, which is the 3 counties that originally also envisioned having any contiguous county be able to join. That was just changed in the last legislative session. Look forward to talking about that. Been here down in South Florida for about 14 years. I've got 42 years in the industry.
Dave Orszewski. I'm a local land use consultant and land use attorney. Been at it for 30-plus years. Was very interested to hear some of the historical stuff that happened before I got here. Very revealing and instructive.
Tim Hernandez. I am the principal of New Urban Communities. We're an urban infill redevelopment builder developer. I'm also an urban planner. So.
I'm Keith O'Donnell. I run the Flagler Services Group, and Henry Flagler was the father of our company. I've been doing this for 35 years, and as you know, we have a very large statewide development presence.
All right, thank you all. Mike, if you could start with addressing the question. I know it's a long question.
A little evidence to suggest, I think, or a story about why this region, which I think is much larger actually than just either Treasure Coast or South Florida region by itself. I really think it's from Sebastian to Key West, this 7-county region. I think it's important to look at it that way. But let's say you're a CEO of a large company in Florida. In fact, the 5th largest corporation in America, with 7 divisions and 121 different departments. This is why I think you need it. With a budget of about $23 billion, sales of $23 billion. Its main business is transportation, housing, healthcare, and leisure services. 2.8 million employees, about 4 million other people, depending on those jobs and those employees to support. with an area about 100 miles longer than the state of New Jersey. All right, this is, just bear with me here. And over the next 4 decades, the shareholders are expecting company growth of about 35% in profits and about 31% in employment, just in this little corporation. And all of this in an environment where there's increased global competition, rising energy costs, increasing environmental regulation and responsibility. And many of your large institutional investors won't invest in your corporation unless you have a business plan to do that. All I've described to you is the 7-county region as a corporation. Those numbers are the 7-county region in terms of jobs, in terms of revenue, in terms of budgets and things like that. I would suggest to you, why wouldn't you have a business plan to operate? So that's my suggestion, yes. Long yes, but yes.
Okay.
And do you want me to expand, or do you just want to go down the...
We'll expand a little bit on it. I think the point is
No,
very clear.
Well, that's just the point. I mean, we need one. Without one, you can't operate. And frankly, we're in the middle of an approach, anyways, to try and develop that regional plan. It's called the Sustainable Communities Initiative. It's a HUD-funded initiative. They've actually scattered this out, those funds out into 45 different locations or into metro regions around the country. And it wasn't to protect birds and bunnies and things like that. In fact, what it was is to begin to get these regions to behave more like businesses, also to get these regions to begin to create economies that are a little more resilient than just selling cheeseburgers, sweaters, and land back and forth to each other. They want something more than that. And in fact, they won't invest as a federal government, not that there's much investing left for them to do, but believe it or not, there is. They won't invest unless you have these plans, one of the plans that they like. And frankly, without that and without a plan, the regional agencies like Joe's and others, you'll never get through the politics, and you'll never get enough people to support some of the regional initiatives that I know Joe's organization and other regional organizations that actually build and operate things, they won't be able to do it unless you can cut through the politics and the financing issues. And you don't do that without a business plan, and you won't do that unless you're behaving regionally. So it's just too hard. So.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. I came here in '98, and in 2000 there was a census. And that census, the report from that census came out around 2001, the earlier part of 2002. And what that report showed, and this is over 10 years ago, is that the 3 counties here were actually acting as one large urbanized area. In fact, it went beyond that. The Department of Commerce designated this one UZA. So that actually hurt an agency like mine, because I was getting the floor for funding for 2 of the counties and sharing the floor for funding for the rail funds with the County of Miami. But instead, now we had one large urbanized area. The power of that was we were the 4th or 5th largest urbanized area in the country. And in fact, if you took the Everglades out of the equation, the amount of population here had truly made it the 3rd densest area in the United States. I had a commuter rail system, or there was a commuter rail system already operating, Tri-Rail. It had a unique business model. It took a county commissioner from each of the 3 counties. Each of those counties also put a business representative on the board. And the governor had 3 positions, one from each of the counties, one being a DOT and one being a governor appointee to come from the other counties. And what came out of our approach, and you heard Michael talk about a little bit, the federal government was already dealing with the fact that the country was becoming more urbanized and more requests. It used to be very easy to go and get an earmark and get funding, but now they were looking at how are we going to give these earmarks out. And they turned around and said the way that we're going to do it is we're going to look for a regional approach, a rational regional transportation approach to how we're going to give our federal funds out. And they threw in, on top of that, looking at public-private partnerships and how we're going to go and do this, and what are the opportunities to leverage the land use that you can get with federal funds going forward. At that time, I think the director from Miami-Dade was Danny Alvarez, and Danny, myself, and I think it was Scanlon from Broward and Bob Fink from Palm Beach, I actually thought Miami should take the lead. They were the largest, they were the center, but Miami really felt that it should be Tri-Rail because we operated in all three systems and we were already in a position to go forward to become a regional authority. So we went after legislation, and those of you who are around know that it involved Connie Mack from the legislature, it involved Jim Blosser, it involved Jim Cummings. There was a whole load of people, Charlie Siemens, Lendy Larson, the board. We actually turned around because we could never get the three counties to agree on the RTA being the regional lead. The only reason that changed was because the business community got involved. We had a transportation summit in 2002. Out of that summit came a strong, compelling business reason to support a transit system. I also want to throw out that we had a commuter rail system that was acting like a subway system. Our average rider goes 4 station stops. They're getting on and off, up and down that system. And if you looked at the 2000 census, the commuting patterns here in the three counties were doing the exact same thing. I think at that time it showed a daily 160,000 people going down, no, maybe it was 320,000 going down into Miami and 160,000 going in the opposite. Our ridership was actually balanced going both directions in both rush hours. So beyond what was being, I would say, mandated out of a 1UZA, they were actually reflecting better than we were expressing ourselves what was really going on down here. So the answer is regionalism was evolving and happening, and it was happening in spite of what was going on, and then there was a reaction to create a regional authority. And I'm hoping a little bit later on we can talk a little bit about what goes right and what goes wrong in creating regional authorities, but a regional authority was created to respond to this need. It's the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority. We were given the legislation to go forward. The only thing that we failed to secure in 2002, and we've been fighting for it ever since, and it's still in the papers, there still is no dedicated funding for a regional authority.
I think the short answer to your question, is yes. I'm hoping that it will be a strategic vision rather than 2 sets of documents. I also agree with Mike that this is about a metropolitan area. If region is not a convenient word, then figure out what the economic unit is for Southeast Florida. I agree with Mike that pieces of it go as far north as Indian River. For other purposes, maybe not quite so far north at this point. But what strikes me is that instead of being internally directed, whether it's agriculture or tourism or whatever, the context in which the evolution of this metropolitan region needs to be undertaken, in my opinion, is international. You take a look at some of the discussions about trade flows, the center of, or the portal to Latin America. Well, there are lots of other Latin American portals that are busy raising their hand and saying, me too. The Panama Canal is starting to frame trade flows coming from the Orient and the Asian countries. So the context in which the metropolitan strategic vision needs to happen is much broader than even simply state or national, in my opinion. It's international. The other thing that I agree with my friend Mr. Giletti here is until we figure out, and it's, I think, probably going to be part of the organizational principle for how you define region and what the strategy looks like, is regional revenue sharing. We've got to figure out a way to support our own needs. Now, the economist in me says, look, if the metropolitan region is going to benefit, then they should absolutely pay for the support of those benefits. It's clearly not going to be the state anymore, unlikely to be the federal government as much anymore. Okay, so we have to pay the piper. That's okay. Now, and I agree, would expand on what Joe has said, the enabling authority doesn't exist now in this state for those regional revenue sources. Just doesn't. And so part of the solution here needs to be, in my opinion, the state saying, okay, regions, put your money where your mouth is, and here's the state law to be able to do it.
All right, take a little bit of different approach here. I think this all comes down to, I'm going to frame it in terms of demographics and economics. South Florida, I've always commented that the linkages between all the counties, they're almost more informal than formal. I've said that probably about the only thing that most people in the counties agree on is, and some people don't care, but for those who do, it's the Dolphins, the Heat, the Marlins, and the Panthers. That's it. That's one of the few things, and it's kind of sad. That's a sad commentary on South Florida that those are among the few things that people, share any kind of concern about. To me, South Florida, this is all about economic competitiveness. Our region is in competition with many other regions around the country. It was just that some of the people here in this room were at the CNU conference, and you're reading about the various places in China, in developing nations, Brazil, India, places that are undergoing tremendous amounts of urbanism and tremendous amounts of economic growth. So what's interesting to me about South Florida is, unlike a lot of the other big cities in the United States, your Dallas, your Atlanta, your Chicago, your LA, we have kind of, where they have one, it's a concentric city form for the urban planners here, and everything feeds into the one, central core area. And that's not just from a physical standpoint, but almost from a cultural standpoint as well. And everything feeds in to this one area, and you get strong cultural institutions, you get strong economic institutions. We lack that here because we have West Palm, we have Fort Lauderdale, we have Miami, and people they don't really necessarily care or know about what's going on in Palm Beach, and there's no commonality of interest in terms of just about anything. So what happens now is we move into this whole new kind of economy with a flatter world, and we see that now businesses are migrating to places where they want to make stuff. Sometimes it's close to where, sometimes they migrate to where they have to be because of natural resource considerations or transportation considerations. But other times, as you get to a more knowledge-based economy, or as Richard Florida talks about, the whole creative economy, people are going to where they want to live, where they want to be. So we have to figure out ways. We can't think about competing with Dade versus Broward, Palm Beach, versus Dade. You can't even think really, to my mind, about competing with Orlando or Tampa. You have to think about competing on a much more global scale, and so that means the investments that we make have to be the investments that make our region more competitive with other big megalopolis regions, in the U.S. and outside the U.S. And then, so what does that mean? That means, it's amazing to me that you really can't get conveniently from any place that really matters here, that would really truly be considered to be a destination, to any other place that really matters that would be considered a destination. It's almost impossible. Anybody who's ever tried to do it, will know that what I'm saying is absolutely true. You can't do it other than getting in your car. So, that's step number one. Transportation-related investments have to be viewed in a regional context. I know we have an agency, that's we're kind of going in that direction, but we're not really anywhere close to. We're so far behind so many of the metropolitan areas in our own countries, much less some of these quote-unquote third world nations like China, who are investing like crazy in a mass transportation infrastructure. The other thing is the environment that we've created here. It doesn't really appeal, in my opinion, other than the climate in most of South Florida, to the Generation X and the Generation Y / millennials who are going to work for these big, huge corporations. You guys would all be amazed here. Some people know how many. Had a conversation with Dr. Voss about this at the CNU, about how many regional headquarters, Latin American, quote unquote headquarters we have in South Florida. And then most of them are down in Miami, Coral Gables area. But there's some, as you move up the coastline. But those people, those big corporations, we don't have big manufacturing here, but
the environments where their employees want to live, we largely don't really have, okay? And so we have to figure out how we can create, you know, those kind of places where people can spend their time doing what they want to do in an environment that they enjoy. And so, I mean, those are kind of some of the things that I think that we should be thinking about and doing. I mean, one of the things that, you know, we need to do is we need to make it easy for people to get around, spend their money where they want to spend it, make it easy for businesses to come here and invest their money, because they have a whole lot of choices now, way more choices. I mean, just like you can sit in your pajamas at night and buy pretty much any product, you know, at 11 p.m. You don't really have to go out to the store anymore than to get your groceries. You can buy almost anything over the internet. Well, a lot of, as Thomas Friedman said, you know, goods and services are going to be made where it's cheapest to make them, cheapest to deliver them, and how we figure out, you know, how to use our strengths, our relative regional and global strengths to our advantage and build on those is the only way not to get ahead, just to stay competitive with what the rest of the world is doing.
I'm glad I'm going last. Answer's yes, with a lot of enthusiasm behind it, but I take a different approach since, you know, Tim does come from academia. He was smart. He came over to the dark side, became a capitalist. But
I don't know how smart that was after the last couple of years.
yeah, that's true. But the approach that I would take is maybe a little more fun, which is, you know, everyone just YouTube the Matrix, blue pill, red pill sequence. How many people don't know what that is? Good. Everyone knows the blue pill and red pill, okay? Which means one of the pills keeps you in your fantasy and the other pill takes you to reality. And then stop it. And the next thing you do is get a Facebook page for entire South Florida, all 7 counties. And so that, because it's all about recruitment. So my approach is that I was very fortunate. I worked for Arvida Corporation, and I watched the magicians put together the Sawgrass, this I-75 interchange, you know, to create Weston. And they also created a new construct where the government, you know, outsources instead of building bureaucracy, they outsource. So, and the school, first thing we talked about when I was at Arvida was schools. So they got a chance to create a community from scratch. And although it wasn't as successful as it should have been, because they were thinking it was Boca Raton and demographics, they were way off on it until Hurricane Andrew created Weston. So my approach on it is that we all have to be recruiters. I mean, and this hall should be overflowing, because this is such an important topic. But it's really up to us to recruit more people to understand that if you have children, you're going to be I have 2 grandchildren. You know, I want my kids to be here. One's not. And I think it's very important that we understand a couple things. One is, how do we make this place attractive? Now, those of you that are students here, how many people would come back? How about you?
Absolutely.
You would come back. Good. There's not a lot that would say that. They want to go to New York City. They want to go to Washington, D.C. They want to go to the West Coast. So, and then actually Tim over here was a pioneer in creating urban edge housing that allowed people to live in the kind of place you live in Washington or New York City. And so we got to connect up what our educational platforms are, because right now up in Boca Raton, where we've developed a lot of projects, I weekly sit with companies that have 40 job openings, 100 job openings, and I'm introducing them to FAU's School of Engineering. I'm introducing them to the Computer Science School, working with the school system to try to create, you know, 10th, 11th, 12th grade constructs, so that they instead of hiring people in Arizona, the young people, the programmers in Arizona, we want to hire them here. They want to hire them here. They don't want to hire them there. And then when people see the job openings there in Santa Clara, and they Google, they go, okay, let's see about the education system. Is there one website? Is something that talks about the educational system? Talks in generalities. So transportation, I look at it from a regional standpoint. I start with education. That if Mama Bear, you know, sees a debate this October and goes, well, that sounds interesting. You know, Papa Bear, didn't you get a job offer from campus management? Yeah, I did. How much? $85,000 a year. Well, hell, In Florida, that should get us a lot. But what about education? And they look up Palm Beach County and go, well, that's so good. But then if they could find Wellington, Boca Raton, and Jupiter, they go, oh my God, this is as good as we have out here. That's a lot less expensive, and on my taxes just get raised to 13%. So those people right now are going to Texas. They're not coming here. So your workforce, you have 8% unemployment, only 1% is qualified for the kind of jobs that are here. So if you want to get the money to fund the bigger infrastructure, transportation constructs, we got to almost be more organic about, you know, and I'd love to have this happen tomorrow, even though I just turned 30. But I'd love to have this happen tomorrow, but the fact is you do have to have a business plan. Mike is so right on. I'm always amazed when I talk about business plans, how people go, I don't really need that. And I can't imagine operating without a business plan. But it's not mandatory. You know, our municipalities don't have business plans. You know, you really don't have. How many people here know about Gov 2.0? Which is you guys got to Google Gov 2.0, and it is his last name is O'Reilly, Tim O'Reilly. In fact, he created the first web page, and he commercialized the web, and he has something called Gov 2.0, which really talks about pulling back the, you know, what government, how government really operates, and have it operate more efficiently. And as soon as you have transparency in government, and you have government applying business plan structures, now all of a sudden you'll find some money. Rather than having a new fireman's fee because you don't want to raise the taxes because you want to get reelected. I mean, so if you don't recruit people to join the fight for regionalism, if you don't recruit people, you know, to care about this issue, then tell them don't complain. There.
Well, okay, so to me, I want to follow up on that part because it's been very interesting. So we've had this lecture series now for a year, right? And at FAU we've had a lot of different things, right? The truth about Florida, we talked about a whole bunch of things. And the one thing we've never been able to do, no matter how big the name is of the speaker that comes in, no matter how much food we give people, no matter how much continuing education credit we give people, the room has never been full. And I don't know, but did we send out 10,000, 15,000 notices? It's on web pages and stuff. So how in the world do I recruit people? Because you say it's important, and it seems that all the panelists say it's important, but we don't get the interest. Are we the wrong place to do this?
You're not giving out money. See, that's the problem. See, so to me, what you have to do, we had this little bit of this conversation too. You got to figure out where's the money. People follow the money. So to me, where's the money? The money is, you know, the biggest amount of money that seems to be available these days, coming from any source, you know, that the government would have access to, is the MPO fund. Okay, like we talked about. So you take the MPO funds. I was thinking about, we had this little conversation. I said, well, you know, how could this actually work? What if you took the MPOs, okay, all the different MPOs for the different counties, and put them all together into one? But, you know, I understand politically that might not be quite so, such a happy thing. But you say, okay, tell you what, 50% or 30% of the money is going to be allocated by some regional super MPO, okay? And they're going to make investments, you know, that are going to, you're going to have to get a majority, okay? And it's going to be comprised of people from Miami, from Broward, from Palm Beach, maybe Monroe, maybe, you know, Martin, St. Lucie, however big you want to make it, okay, to get a bigger pool of money. And then the rest of it then can still be allocated by the individual MPOs. So to me, then there's a compelling reason for everybody to have to talk. They have to talk because they're going to argue about who gets the money, and that's okay. However it goes, it goes. However it gets allocated, it gets allocated. But at least then there's a dialogue or conversation that has to take place that doesn't have to take place today.
David?
I want to pick up on a couple of things. I agree.
Move the
Giving
mic
away-
for a second.
Giving away money is the way to do it, okay? My take on it is, though, that in order to fill the room, you need to start focusing on the definition of the metropolitan regions, metropolitan area, whatever language you want to use. It's economic self-interest, because that's the only way that you're going to get people to the room. And I don't disagree with part of that approach, except I know that the MPO's dollars are not enough, okay? So yes, we can have some sort of alternative allocation mechanism, whatever it turns out to be, but fundamentally, if we can't get a consensus definition of what the metropolitan area's economic self-interest is, and then frame it to be sufficiently desirable for people to pay to support that self-interest, that economic activity, then we'll never get out from under the infrastructure deficit we have. And it's, mobility is clearly a part of it, but it's not the only part. There are huge infrastructure shortfalls in the overall region. And so the short answer to your question is, start talking about economic self-interest, and if you want to ante up, come talk to us about how it is we should be, what kind of game we should be playing to develop economic activity.
You know, I'm sitting here and I am used to seeing large crowds respond. Matter of fact, when we did the transportation summit, we had a target of over 150. 600 showed up, and I had an entire staff going out there trying to buy chickens to support the restaurant to be able to deal with the crowds that had come in. And I am going to say that the very first outreach I did when I came down here was to the universities, on top of which, even when I was looking at where we could potentially put in yards and whether or not we could do it with trade schools so we could move students over, because the future is going to be determined by the education that goes out there. Businesses will tell you that. There has to be a business model. There has to be a marriage between the problems and what's going on with the universities, and the universities seeing that part of what comes out of it is their approach to how are we going to train the future. I also want to react a little bit to Flagler. I've had a lot of meetings with Flagler over the years, okay, talking about, because every developer that's out there is looking at what are the opportunities. We've always approached it from the standpoint of where are we going to build the roads to support the development, okay? And I don't want to fight the largest lobby in the United States in terms of the road builders. We need roads. But we don't need roads in South Florida, okay? What we need in South Florida is alternatives. And even though the infrastructure is already there, there are ways today to go and modify that infrastructure so it meets the future needs. Miami has already turned around, and they did put a development in at one of their stations. We are trying desperately right now at 2 of our stations to look to see if we can put development in at the stations. The only problem is we were looked as a traffic mitigation measure without a lot of property, so we actually have to get money to buy property and then entice business to come in there. But if you don't think that I already have going out to Tamiami Airport, going all the way up to the north, that there's developable areas up there that the developers are saying we want a link in to be able to have people use mass transit to get down here. The future generation is not looking to go and drive a car. Read the demographics, read what's going on. They're looking for the alternatives, and we have the opportunity to do that, but that marriage has to take place going forward.
You said you wanted to know why there aren't more people involved. I mean, who are you looking for, I guess I would ask, to be involved? Who are we looking for?
Yeah, okay.
Let me just, for my money, I mean, look, most people, and I'm going to ask, how many elected officials are in the room right now? Just one. Okay. Last I checked, we still are in a republic and a representative form of government, because most people I know, including my wife, and because we operate also a construction business on the side, and we do other things as well to make ends meet. Look, most people have zero time or tolerance for any of this. And the only one, they elect people to deal with these issues. And most people are living out of their inbox, whether you're in the office or you're hanging drywall, whatever, the emergency of the day. They could care less about any of this. But what they did was elect people who aren't living out of their inbox, who are supposed to be looking out for us. These are the sort of the directors of the departments and the divisions of the local governments. And I'm not saying that's the only thing. And one other thing, how many of you own businesses out there? Okay. If you really want to change things, you change the culture of thinking in South Florida. I have a business card here. It says regionalism, one neighborhood at a time. I used to think when we went into neighborhoods, we would get a few people who would get really excited, and that's true, because there's a lot of civic-minded people out there, and they really get the regional thing. What it should say, regionalism, one elected official at a time, because frankly, they're not thinking that way either. Mm-hmm. And until those people that we elect actually get involved, and I know the business community, especially, and I know Keith and others, Cummings, and there's a bunch of others through the Regional Business Alliance, They get it,
Mhm.
but there's only a few. And so we are way behind the 8 ball. And I'll tell you a quick story real quick. In Shanghai, a friend of mine went to Shanghai, bought me a T-shirt, because that's all I ever want. I like T-shirts. So we fish a lot. Charlie knows you wear T-shirts. Or you wear those fancy, what are those fancy shirts they sell? Yeah, whatever. Anyways, I still do T-shirts. So, but he brought me back a T-shirt. He saw it on a busboy in one of the restaurants in Shanghai, and all it said, and I don't know if I told Jim this story. It says, "Better city, better life." And the guy said, "What the heck does that mean?" Well, he didn't have. The busboy told him what it meant. I said, "The government is involved in getting Shanghai to be a better place to live." You know, this is a busboy. They've done an amazing job over there. So he brought me the T-shirt back. I put it on the back of my chair in my office, because my chair's kind of falling apart, so it's like a new slipcover for my chair, to remind me that, look, when was the last time you saw a T-shirt or a hat or anything, or anybody knowing anything about regional planning or city planning at that level? They have done an amazing job. The entire city is on board with sort of reinventing and redeveloping Shanghai, because they know that's all they have. They can't go west or north or south. Look, they have to live with the city. So, you know, if we're going to do this, I mean, and I'm not just picking on the elected officials, because I am one now, but look, they have to be on board. I mean, we can do all these regional plans and the business plan, which I think is very important, but if they don't pick it up and think it's a good idea, guess what? Those 7 divisions and 121 departments that make up Southeast Florida, the government of Southeast Florida, the plans doesn't go anywhere, because that's where the money is. That's where the decisions are being made. It's not, you know, me or my wife, you know, running a business, and it's not that. It's these elected officials that we've all trusted. We use the word trust. That's the huge trust, to make sure we don't get stuck and left behind. And if they don't do their jobs, well, we are where we are, or I think we are behind. So.
What you just said about a T-shirt is really interesting to me. So I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I visit my family every now and then, and there is a bus lane. And all the buses say, "I'll be in downtown Amsterdam in 10 minutes. How about you?"
Okay.
Right? And it will take you 45 minutes if you go by car. And guess what? There are more buses now than there have ever been, because that simple message, instead of the commercial for Maruni, you know,
Yeah.
but saying you'll be in Amsterdam in 10 minutes, that worked.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of the elements that everybody's talking about, the education, the transportation, where the money is, getting that constituency together. What we need, I think we could all sit here in an hour and agree on what we need, what the business plan, at least the framework of a business plan should be, the vision for it. It's just getting it from that sort of, so it's not a hallucination, it's actually a vision, and there's money to implement it and things like that. And the local elected officials and the business folks really, like, they believe in it. And that's the trick. And
It's interesting, because as we started this program, the interdisciplinary applied research institutes were the first to get chopped in the middle of the budget cycles. Similarly, I think with elected officials, particularly given municipal pressure on municipal budgets currently, not just municipal, but especially municipal. I just came back from Charlotte, where one of the tours at the convention was the TOD sites for the Charlotte Light Rail. It's 9.6 miles long. It doesn't carry a lot of people yet. But there were 2 stories I'd like to share. The first is, under North Carolina statute, the city, who in this instance owned the dirt adjacent to the station so that they could plan TODs, to go to your point, Joe, they could choose in the disposal, the procurement of the developer or the master developer for their TODs, to value the TOD in ways other than dollars. So if they wanted to champion affordable housing and create a deed restriction or some sort of other element of the developer's agreement to provide affordable housing, then that could be credited towards the value of the disposition of that piece of dirt. It wasn't just market value. Another one they used was historical preservation. They had a couple of mills that were left over from an earlier time in Charlotte, and they wanted to preserve the mills. So the dirt had the mills on it, and when the city conveyed the dirt to the developer, one of the things was historical preservation. So the purpose, I think, of that story was for the elected officials, they want to subscribe to the vision. They want to get to the point where better city, better life, or better life, better city. But until we think more broadly, and it's not just budgets, this is not just a budget process, and until we give them the kind of flexibility that they need to make those kind of decisions and validate their municipal vision or metropolitan area vision, it becomes very difficult, because now the only way you can sell that piece of dirt for a transit-oriented development is to get best dollar. Well, no, that's not what I want. That's not how I want to get there. So I think part of the issue here is going to be a willingness to modify the way that government electeds do business. And we need to be able to move away from a strictly budgetary approach to this. And I would argue that in this kind of a context, that's going to be very difficult. But I don't perceive us being able to get there until we think more broadly about what it is that we're doing, and it's not just dollars.
You know what amazes me is every time I talk to city managers, elected officials, I ask them how many times they benchmark other successful cities, and they never do. I never hear a conversation about, well, because when I say, do you know in Palm Beach Gardens, you can do, when Tire Kingdom did their headquarters, they got a permit in 2 weeks? They did? Exactly. Do you guys know in Sunrise that I get a phone call from Lou probably every 2 weeks? Any deals for me? Really? He does that? Absolutely. So they even though there's a construct for it with ULI and other constructs, I'm sure they all meet. I think they meet in Orlando once a year or something, but it just seems like there's no best practice. It doesn't seem like there is a competitive matrix where you look at it and say, well, here's what works and here doesn't work. And when David talks about what happened, you know, in Charlotte, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that so that when Joe has his next RFP, which they've come a long way from those nutty RFPs they did years ago, which was his dream scenario. Give me $100 an FAR foot and I own you.
We're desperate.
Sorry, Joe. But we don't have that. There's not that information. You don't have that opportunity. So when you address, you know, the city councils and city managers to try to get them. So my new tactic is to talk to the fire department. That's my new tactic. I'm just going to talk to the fire department and say, you know something, in the future you guys are going to have a hard time. So why don't we talk about how we can use your talents to see if we can't change the way the system works versus, you know, writing letters or showing up at a meeting or something. So I think what's one of the things that as we talk about here is that, you know, elected officials should be here. We should have an opportunity to produce a white paper for them, give them some opportunity to have that construct, and then, you know, David will get more work.
You know, well, go ahead. Do you want to say something?
Well, the only other thing is that aside giving the ability to the local municipal officials to implement their vision, there was one TOD site, large TOD site, that was assembled by the city, knowing that it could eventually flip it for purposes beyond just dollars, that is all the way at the end of the line. It's easily 10 years from absorption, okay? The guy he was described as a governmental employee who happens to be a deal junkie, and I absolutely believe that that is correct, okay? It's called the Scaly Bark Station. It's 10 years before it's get used. But the reason the city affirmatively went out and bought the acreage and made it available was so that when people rode the line, it didn't stop just where the development was. We're setting an outer marker. Here's a milestone that we will eventually get to. So the vision isn't just the stuff that you're currently riding on in the TOD that's coming out of the ground. You need to be looking 10 years on, because they're now looking to expand to the north with their system and to the east and west. And so what they did was created a perception, an expectation on the part of their citizenry that this is just part of an ongoing process. And I thought it was phenomenal that they, had the development wisdom to go out there 10 years ahead of time and buy the dirt so that it would be available, and that they're setting this very physical marker that people have to drive by or ride by every single day, saying, okay, we're not there yet, but we're gonna get there.
They're
Tim,
yelling,
keep
they're
it-
yelling at you. You keep turning your
Oh,
head this
sorry,
way and you
sorry,
don't
sorry.
pick it up on the mic, so I just want to, I love relaying information.
Thank you,
so
I
good.
appreciate it.
Returning to my theme of economics, I think we talk about public-private partnerships and things like that's some kind of special event or series of events that happens from time to time and that we have to create. I think Keith made an interesting point. It just needs to be the way we do business in South Florida, is there's a constant conversation and dialogue between the public and private sectors. Because to get more things done, you have to leverage. Just like a developer like us, okay, we can't do it all with all our own money. Maybe Keith can, but I certainly can't. But I mean, so you have to leverage. So what you have to do is you have to figure out how to leverage whatever resources you have and draw more in. I think people in general in South Florida, I bet you most municipalities would be absolutely shocked at the amount of international and domestic investment that's in South Florida that we're just not even really aware of. I'll give you an example. My mom has Alzheimer's. Okay, so my wife and I were taking care of her, and it's a lot. Anybody who ever had somebody like that, and she moved into our house. It's we've got kids. It's a lot. So my brother, who lived in Milwaukee, he says, I'm going to come down and help you. He came down here, and in one day, he got a job for a company called Horbiger, which is based in Germany. Is massive. It's like a multi-billion-dollar company. They have manufacturing facilities in Pompano Beach, okay? And they've got places in Texas. They've got places all over the United States. And he's like now, he's like gotten 2 promotions in 6 months because of the lack of what you said before, the lack of skill and talent that they have down there. He's the guy who like programs the machines, and they're making all these like parts for compressors, giant compressors and stuff. This is happening, like on the corner of McNabb and Powerline Road, like less than 10 miles from where we're sitting right here. I mean, I bet you most people in this room didn't even know this was going on. And there's like plenty more examples like this. He actually got a call. He's just he's making like $60,000 a year doing this kind of thing. But that's a good wage. That's a lot of money for most people. And what is interesting to me is that, if I was in a municipality, I would be like, I would know every single business that's in my town. And I would be saying, what can I do to help you grow? What can I do? Because it's easier to help someone that's already here grow than it is to attract someone new in.
Joe?
Yeah, I want to respond. Keith, first off, you are right in terms of even learning on RFPs and being involved from that end. Had a board that was very, very aggressive because we were desperate for funds, and sometimes you don't really listen to what the business community was saying. But I also wanted to answer your question. When you talked about cities and knowing whether or not they've done the best practices. In our industry, we're constantly monitoring that. I can tell you who's the best in every facet of it. But when I've gone to the Regional Business Alliance, I've heard that exact quote. They will tell you where it was that, Ralph Marinson can tell you that it only took a couple of weeks to a month to get a permit when he was doing business up in South Carolina, where it was taking him 6 months to a year to get that same permit down here. So the business community will tell you where the best practices are because they're constantly looking at where are the opportunities. And it leads me back into where I was saying before is that we have to have this marriage of the business communities with our universities, okay, so that we're looking at, well, how are we going to go forward with this? Because I will tell you for a fact, if the Regional Business Alliance had not responded the way that they had, we would not have reacted even in forming a regional authority. And you bring up Charlotte, and I have a board member that used to say all the time, well, when they couldn't get their act together and come up with the local funds in Central Florida, guess where the money went? It went to Charlotte, okay? And we lost an economic opportunity as a state when that happened. So I think that we have to stop losing economic opportunities and look at the partnerships that need to be formed to go forward.
All right, so as we were thinking, this panel was going to take a life of its own, and we have about 10 minutes left. And I still want to get back to the thing that you said, Keith, because you said you need to recruit to get money, all right? And Tim basically said you need money to recruit, which leaves me in an interesting position because I still haven't figured out how to get either one. But the question that I want to ask is,
Facebook.
I will have a Facebook page. But when I heard the first panel, right, I think the reason that the Joint Center worked and that it was a trusted voice was basically because there was a leader, right? It was a leader, there was clear leadership. He was able to get all these people that worked really hard around him to do all the work. He really was pretty smart. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing was that he had a dedicated funding source because he was good friends with the legislature. Now, here we are. We don't have, I think, strong leadership. Certainly not a charismatic person that's able to pull that off. The world has changed. A lot of things that they did, they can't do anymore. And there is no dedicated funding source. So where does that leave us? Who needs to, and I think my question is, who needs to take the lead in this? And how do you do that? And you all have 2 minutes to respond to that.
I'll just blurt it out. The South Florida Regional Planning Council and Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council have been fortunate enough to be presented with an opportunity, I think, at least to provide, and look, you only get one chance at this, and this has to be really good, a forum for exactly what you're talking about, this kind of growing leadership. And I can thank HUD again. I thanked them at the CNU conference. I spoke with Shelley Potisha there. And she's the one responsible for getting the money down here into Southeast Florida to give us the chance. And, you know, Thomas Edison, just one of the best things he ever said, and he's a brilliant inventor, entrepreneur, everything. He said, look, good fortune happens when good opportunity meets good planning. Mm-hmm. We got the opportunity. Now we just have to figure out how to do this business plan by involving everybody that we can and making sure we're smart about where we focus. Now this kickoff event that's coming up, we have 2 years to put this thing together with everybody involved, the 7 counties from Sebastian to Key West, which is no easy trick. I mean, I look at Chicago and Miami-Dade's as big as the Chicago metro area, so now what do I got? I got 3 of them I got to deal with, or 4 of them. So, and I want to make sure, one of my concerns, and we're going to need help with this, is that there's a large agenda, a very comprehensive agenda to get done, all the issue areas we have to deal with. And look, for my money, I'm interested, and I heard one of them come up, actually 2 of them come up today, because people need something to rally. These elected officials need something they can rally around, and I don't want to go past my 2 minutes. But besides the effort to create the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority, I always look at the best effort regional effort I've ever seen in this country, and it was pulled off by the Water Management District. Mm-hmm. In 5 years, they got 16 counties together, and to not only come up with a plan to save the Everglades, but also to tax people to pay for it. So I'm just hoping that we find an issue inside this larger sustainability plan, and I think mobility's the one, because it addresses everything. Why? What's that?
I have to laugh, Mike, because I agree with you with that plan, okay? But I went to all these meetings, and they repeatedly told us it was not going to cost the taxpayer any money.
Well, maybe that's the great trick. Well, I knew it was going to cost us something, especially when I got that bill. But anyways, and they did it without local representation. I mean, those folks aren't elected. They just taxed us. Anyways, it was brilliant, I thought. So I hope we can be as brilliant somehow. But I think the key of all of this, education, certainly, I have a soft spot for that, being a school board member and thinking that is close to this first issue. But Henry Flagler brought us here because of transportation, this and air conditioning, of course. But this region would be nothing without that rail line. We've abandoned it, basically. We're going to get it back. What I'm thinking is that this mobility issue is the one that we should focus on. It will address everything, the form of development, the efficiency. Tim was talking about the places for the Y and the Y and X-Geners to live. It will give us choice. Joe's right. We don't need any more roads. We have more roads. I checked this. More roads, more miles of roads per person than any metropolitan area in the country. Right here in this region. So why do we need more roads? Because we don't have any other form of transportation. It addresses where businesses can locate, better addresses for business. It moves goods and services around. Everything that we need. Again, better region, better life. So I want us to be able to focus on one thing, because when you scatter things about that everything's important, we're never going to find champions to do that one, I think, linchpin issue, which I think is mobility, and get us, housing gets developed around it. I'm just talking out loud here. I guess that's what we're supposed to be doing. There's my 2
Hi,
minutes.
Joe.
So.
One, I wanted to clear up that the reason I threw out education was when Keith threw out recruitment. All right, that's where I believe the recruitment had to start, was through our educational institutes. The other part is that you also heard Michael talking about opportunities that are there. And when we talked even about the FEC, we actually went out to meet with every one of the cities along that corridor. And what we found was when they knew, and those that didn't know, we went through what were the economic activities that surround every one of those stations. We got commitments from every city up and down that corridor that they would be willing to not only invest, but actually put money up towards the operation as we go forward. So there's a plan there. There's an opportunity to go and have things happen, and in spite of everything else you hear about a high-speed rail and everything else, the FEC knows that there's opportunities to put a commuter rail system in. We also need east-west connectors. We're actually working with the city of Fort Lauderdale. We actually have become the federal recipient for going after federal funds for them to start putting in a streetcar system as we look to go forward. There is a lot of dynamic opportunity going on, and to try and respond, what we've done is we've tied in the regional planning councils. We have contracts with both the regional planning councils. We work with the regional business alliances. We work with ULI, because all of this comes into how do we effectively manage looking at that opportunity and then sell that opportunity as a business opportunity going forward.
And I'm going to try to get back to your original question. I think the concept of a trusted place is very, no, it wasn't, is very important, okay? I mean, I went back, and thank you for taping these sessions. I went back and watched Bob Yarrow's presentation on the New York approach. And I think that John DeGrove, with his special connections and his special charisma, was able to survive multiple budget cycles, okay? But that's because of who he was and what the center was doing. I think a trusted place, including an academic perspective and probably a nonprofit perspective and a business perspective, needs to be able to continue. And it's got to be insulated, it seems to me, from annual budget wars. And if I had a delivered solution, I would. I mean, normally you start with the Fortune 100 and you go from there. Part of the difficulty, I think, for us is that we don't have a lot of Fortune 100 companies located here. But the concept of a trusted place, one that can provide independent perspective and people can point to and say, yeah, this is good, and yeah, municipalities can come here if they've got a problem and they'll get good advice. I think that's an important element here, and it's got to be ongoing. It's got to be a long-term 10, 20, 30-year commitment to be able to help us evolve.
You know, I think that part of the problem is it's hard to get, when you're asking about, how do you get everybody to talk to one another and to think more regionally and more long-term. I mean, part of the problem is, again, this fragmented nature of South Florida. There's really no compelling reason for people to do it right now. So to me, I mean, again, I'm noted for thinking up all these ideas that there's probably something wrong with them. Maybe that's why they never get invented, or they get implemented. But I mean, why couldn't there be some kind of, why couldn't you have some kind of agency, or not an agency, because I don't want to have more bureaucracy, but some kind of a group that maybe could be comprised of like the 3 county board chairmen and the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, the mayor of Miami, and the mayor of West Palm Beach, okay? And anytime there's some kind of investment that's going to be made with public dollars in South Florida that's, coming from the state, the federal government, this group has to sign off on it somehow. There's these 6 people. And,
people probably wouldn't like that. Some people wouldn't like that, but maybe in the question they should make their decision on whether this is the right investment to be made or the wrong investment to be made, or maybe it could be altered or modified in some way or rechanneled, would be, does this make our region more competitive, you know, in 25 years or 50 years or 100 years? And if they framed framed every major resource allocation decision with that question in mind, I bet we would have gotten a lot of different decisions, you know, made over the last 20 years.
Keith?
I think one of the to pick up on I'm glad I'm going last again. To pick up on what these guys have been talking about, we do have the Coke Pepsi program. No matter where you look, you've got or Mac PC. You know, just in Palm Beach County, you've got such a large county. I mean, we're a peninsula within a peninsula, right? So you have this major peninsula, and then you take the Everglades. We've got another peninsula, so we're squeezed. So just think in South County, our business development board is made up of Palm Beach County Business Development Board, which I serve on, is made up of about 80% West Palm people and North Palm. And the mentality in Palm Beach County is more West Palm oriented because they think Boca Raton is part of Broward County. Well, my business is mostly Broward County and Dade County and Boca Raton and Charlotte and Atlanta, and I do no business in West Palm. So you got these realities of these little micro communities. But I think from a bigger perspective, what I have found, because I do work in all the different counties, is there's always a leadership group. At our business development board, we just raised $400,000 on an idea called Behind the Gates. It's already working. We got Wellington, all of a sudden has popped out. People are writing checks and bringing their when their buddies come down for the polo season. They're looking to bring their companies down, and so you have leadership groups in each different community. I think what you guys have talked about is there really is no place for that leadership group to come together with public-private. So yes, we can talk about taxing. I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're right, Mike, about the water district, but I think that
The only reason I said that
I don't want to move away.
They found an issue. They found an issue to rally everybody behind, and we have the best data. That we've built the best constituency for TOD and transportation up and down the coast from Jacksonville. You know, and I'm just to answer that question. I'm just saying, look, we can scare the pants off people to get them involved and get them to come, just like the district did. Said, look, we're going to be out of water, and there's going to be dead fish everywhere. I mean, come on. I mean, that's it. And Charlie, you know, with the Pine Barrens, what was the rallying thing there? Was the snail? They found something, some hook that got them. Maybe not the Pine Barrens, but others have found hooks that have actually got people engaged, got leadership groups to form around the threat. Because humans won't do anything unless they're completely threatened, like with extinction or something. I mean, that's just our nature.
Or you're giving away money.
Yeah, even with money. So anyways, I'm just trying to find an issue that we can rally around so we don't get too diluted with all these other things. And those other things will be brought along with this. I think mobility is the key to us. So.
Okay.
Well, you do have October 22nd, Lynn University is hosting the presidential debate, the last one. 65 million people in the United States will be watching that debate. We don't know how many internationally will be watching, but I'm sure there'll be quite a lot. We have an opportunity to broadcast a regional approach. Here's sort of something I'll pick on my own city for a second. So Lynn University worked their tail off, competed against the whole country, won this debate, the most coveted debate. The little old 2,000 student in Lynn University. And Delray Beach shows up with already a business plan saying, we're going to take the first Thursday and we're going to have everybody come up in the avenue, and the city of Boca's going, what happened? Well, it isn't Boca-centric. Yeah. It could be whatever you want it to be. It could be South Florida-centric. So it isn't stealing a night to bring everybody down to Las Olas. And it's what message do we want heard by people in the country? Well, that's a good way to rally people, because Kevin did a good job, Dr. Ross did a good job of raising money. He can't advertise. The rules are you can't advertise. You can't say PNC Bank is sponsoring it. You can't do that. You're raising it for the right reasons. But you know, these guys are right. If you do have a threat of something happening as well as something compelling to get the message out, because we all know absorption's the issue. I mean, we're running out of water, we're running out of high-wage jobs, and we got plenty of call centers, and thank God we do to cover operating expenses, but that's not how you create prosperity. So we got some very bright minds in this room. I'm very thankful to Charlie, who's helped us with Plan Mobility in the city of Boca Raton, which is really creating a new construct. It's taken 2 years to get it done, but we're getting there.
I've been told by the back to stretch it because I guess the food isn't here. So I actually want to ask. I actually want to ask a question. Right?
That's the other thing. they'll get people
Can I
food.
say one thing?
Yeah, please.
Because one of the things that I wanted to react to in terms of the threat, the 2010 census is now out, okay? And for all of you who've heard that everybody was moving, the halfbacks that were going back up halfway and they were going in for better business development, it didn't occur, okay? In fact, we grew and we continue to grow. And every projection out there says that we're gonna have a crisis beyond the crisis that are already there because people are moving down here, they're gonna continue to move down here, and the demographics are all showing that that's what's coming. So there is a hook out there, there is a problem that's working its way down. We're seeing it, okay, and even in troubled times, and even with 25% fare increases, we're seeing ridership that has grown up double-digit every single year. I'm working with 6% this year, and that's because the gas prices have gone down, but I haven't lost ridership, I've just lost the accelerated growth.
So I want to ask one question, and just a really quick response. And you brought it up, Mike, all right? So you're talking about this example of the water management district. And that was an example where in a period of, was it 2 years? Very short amount of time, this whole plan was written. Right? If I look at the Netherlands when I was there in 1987, they started writing an environmental policy. Within 2 years, the entire environmental policy structure was completely changed. A totally different structure that asked for 95% reduction of pollution, and it was approved. So the question is, and the water management district is this other example of something that went really fast. What I continuously hear is education, we need to change this, we need to get people at a table, which sounds to me like something we'll be talking for another 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
How can we is it reasonable to ask to make that change faster? And if we do, how do we do that? Is there, the mobility issue, it's been going on for a while. Is there something that we can rally about? Is there something with economic development, public-private partnerships, whatever it is, that we can get that change going? Or is that not desirable, and does it just need to wait it out?
My take on it is that it's not necessarily issue-oriented. The Water Management District, the members of the Water Management District were appointed rather than elected, and accordingly they did not have to stand for election, and they had a dedicated funding source that wasn't subject to anybody's budget process except theirs. So you can pick whichever sexy issue you want. Mobility is a perfect one to start with, and Flagler's Railroad is probably the place to start. But unless you get it outside of an annual budgetary process or a 4-year cycle, some of these issues are intractable in those time periods. So I don't know how you get to the point where you can get agreement in a shorter period of time.
Just a little context, because I've been at this for a long time, and I will tell you that I know people who have been working on the water management district, the Everglades issue, for 50 years. All right, look, we got a big problem. We got to clean up every year. I mean, they did, and some of these people are like 80 and they're still working on this issue. What happened was. Well, 80 is probably the new 50 now, so my mistake.
I hope so.
So as old as Charlie had been working on this issue. Anyway, so what happened was there was a crisis, drought, fish dying, closing the river and all that. We've been working on the FEC, TOD, charter for the new urbanism issue, trying to change sort of the culture of thinking about building cities and how we grow since I was a kid, since 1982. We actually recommended the state in, what was it, 91 or 92, I think it was 92, to buy the FEC Railroad. They were in deep trouble. For $400 million, we could have bought the whole bloody line. $400 million bucks, done. From Jacksonville to Miami, done. We bought all the land, the whole thing. Now, we have other things we're spending our money on. So these issues, and in the Netherlands, I mean, after the storms in the North Sea, I mean, flooded so much. It took a while to get that, get that going, but I'm just saying that there is a sort of a tipping point for some of these issues, and I believe we've
There is.
reached it for mobility. I mean, we've been at it for a long time with the railroads, and then Joe comes along, and the Tri-Rail thing was a maintenance mitigation thing for I-9. It wasn't meant to be a commuter rail system, but people liked it so much, and I think there was some value to it, and elected officials liked it. They thought they were doing a good thing, so they funded it partially, and, you know. Sorry, Joe. Partial, for any of the DOT folks out there, partially funded it. But I'm just saying, these issues, you've got to find those issues that have reached ahead. And I think this mobility issue, we have so many good numbers about how much money we waste, how the economy is so bad, how others are just kicking the tails off us because we can't get freight in and out of here. I mean, so I think that issue is ripe now. I mean, we've all been busting on it for a long time and criticizing, but that, to me, is a rallying thing that I think touches all those other issues. Even sea level rise, you know, we have to look at that too. And I said, on top of everything else, we got to look at sea level rise. So I just don't want to get distracted by all these other things. We need to find that core issue and get after it and that's what you get the regionalism behind. That's what you get the new if there is a new organization or organizations, that's where you rally, because that's where the money is at the end of the day, transportation.
I'm going to let Keith